Um, the Resident Evil 2 remake was like my tied favourite game of last year. Like, it wasn't perfect, but it was everything I could have wanted from a remake of Resident Evil 2. You know, creating the tense fear through gameplay I loved from Resident Evil and putting it into something brand new. I loved it. So when the remake of 3 came out a while ago, I was really excited, and I've still not bought it. It looks alright, but it's apparently pretty short, which is like fine I guess, but it also doesn't seem as replayable as other Resident Evils, and since there's plenty of other stuff I want to play, I'm just gonna sit here and stare into the sunset. I just want to play Resident Evil now. All this thinking about Resident Evil made me think about Resident Evil, and so that's right, it happened again. I replayed 4 and 2, but I played through one I've never played before, which is Revelations. This one's kinda weird. It came out in 2012, a few months before Resident Evil 6 and Operation Raccoon City, and a lot of the consensus I heard was that it's a return to the classic survival horror of Resident Evil, and looking back at interviews, that's what they were going for. It's a more horror-based Resident Evil in between the chaotic action ones, while also trying to modernise those original games. However, while the things I heard about this game back then were positive, after the series went back to more of a horror focus and the actiony ones started being appreciated more, this one kind of faded away. Except not really, because like it's been ported to fucking everything. So, I'ma give it a go. I shouldn't hit my desk in recordings. It might be like a hidden gem of Resident Evil, or it might just not be very good. I don't know, it's worth a shot, but this was originally a 3DS game, but I have no decent way of recording 3DS footage, so I'm playing the HD version on PC, which isn't much different. It's the same game plus like a new difficulty option and obviously slightly better graphics, nothing like game changing. The plot starts with Parker Luciani looking for Jessica Sherwood on this big ass boat. Also Jill Valentine is there looking for Chris Redfield, but like she's just a side character, no one knows who she is. Their boss guy gets a call from Chris, however, who's totally fine, and then like the boss guy has a moment where he realises like, ah shit, I just sent Jill and Parker to find you, can you go get them for me? And from there, terrorism. By going on that boat, Jill and Parker have fallen right into the hands of this mysterious villain, and at the start I actually kind of like that. You don't really know what's going on, and it feels like everyone is falling for this big trap, and it's kind of neat, but as it progresses, like, I don't know, it gets more Resident Evil-y. There's this big plot to kill a bunch of fish, and like, it's fine, I guess. I followed along. I didn't hate the characters or anything, but I kind of predicted most of the plot, and I just don't think I like Resident Evil stories that much. I love these games, but I just don't really care about these big conspiracy plots where it's just like, oh, the BBC has created a virus in an attempt to destroy the IRS, and as a member of the TF2, only you can stop them and save the world. And like, I'm a simple boy. 4 is my favourite story in a Resident Evil game because I think Leon is funny. Actually, I notice I do this in a lot of videos where I say like, oh, the plot's really good and interesting, it's just, I don't want to spoil it, and I think I mean that I just don't give a shit. Like, there are plenty of games with writing I like, and Resident Evil Revelations writing isn't terrible or anything, just, I don't care. Actually, they do this weird thing where, it's episodic, but it's like not. So every level ends with some cliffhanger like, oh, what's gonna happen next? Find out next week, but you can't buy this game episodically. So like, who's gonna say, God, I really want to know if they survive in the next cutscene, but I think I'll stop playing there. Anyway, yeah, the story is a Resident Evil plot. It's whatever. The graphics though, I actually kind of like. As I said, this is the HD version of the game, and it looks about as good as you'd expect from a 2013 HD version of a 3DS game. I'd say it maybe looks as good as an early 7th gen game or something. It's not gorgeous, but it's totally playable. I like the effort put into making the boat look creepy. The lighting can be very dark, there's lots of marks and scratches on stuff, and the overall environment, it just feels messy and cramped in the best possible sense. You compare this to like the more empty corridors in Dead Aim, another Resident Evil based around a boat, and Revelations is just so much more fun to navigate. That's not to say emptiness can't be creepy, but like, that's going off topic a bit. A lot of the monsters are cool as well. They can look a bit samey. There's two enemies which are complete opposites, one being ranged and one being melee, but visually, it's kind of difficult to tell the differences quickly. Apart from that though, I think the similar look they have gives them some sense of uniformity. It feels like these are all different results of the same virus. They all have this kind of pained expression with these horrible mutations. A lot of this kind of formless shape, but still feel like creatures somehow, and it's all pretty creepy and unique for Resident Evil. Most of the time Resident Evil monsters are very clear things. Even creepier enemies like the Regenerators still look like big healthy boys, but Revelation's more destroyed looking enemies is something you'd expect more from Silent Hill, which isn't a complaint either. These monsters can still be pretty... They're not my favourite. They can feel a little samey, as I said, and I think they could have been a little more varied without using that uniformity, but I like them quite a bit, and for Resident Evil it stands out. Also, Jessica's costume is great too. Everyone else is dressed reasonably, and then I don't know, she got bored and ripped one of the legs off her wetsuit. The game goes for a very horror focused tone. Jessica's costume does not reflect that, my god. The interviews I mentioned say that they chose the 3DS for the horror capabilities, which that sounds like two completely disconnected statements, but apparently it was because the 3D effect could be used for horror. They also wanted to modernise the horror focused games, which just seems to mean making it more like Resident Evil 4. So when going in, I thought this was going to be more of a horror Resident Evil with Resident Evil 4's controls, but it's more like Resident Evil 4 in a horror setting. The horror aspects of Resident Evil are toned down significantly to the point where they feel almost non-existent. There's no save rooms, no combining herbs, no inventory management to speak of apart from a free weapon limit, and while this boat is open, you're never given much reason to explore, and you don't have to plan your routes since the game is very linear. And on top of that, you don't really feel like you get to know this environment. The thing I always like about these smaller scale exploration based games is that you really memorise the location as you see all of it multiple times, and you don't really get that with Revelations because the later game is very actiony and constantly forces you in a linear path, and the game very frequently takes you away from the boat as well to play as different characters in a different location. You barely get time to fully understand this environment, and I feel like it would have benefited from just slowing down a bit and giving you more exploration. The horror aspect can be seen a bit at the beginning, as you don't fight many enemies at once, and the ones you do fight take a fair few bullets to kill, and the structure is a bit more of exploration based, with you finding keys to open doors you saw earlier and stuff. But because of the God damn. Leave that in. But because of the different characters you play as, this tone comes and goes at the start and later goes away completely, throwing much more enemies at you, becoming much more linear, and opening up the combat areas a bit. As I said, this is Resident Evil 4 with more of a horror focus, and as I also said, the horror focus disappears, so this is Resident Evil 4. A lot of the same appeal as here. Its clunky controls and slow movement work to give it an intensity, and it doesn't feel unfair or anything because the game is built with them in mind. The HD version has this more conventional third-person camera and movement, but I changed it to the tank controls because the game is definitely made for them. It's almost like a rail shooter in that you have to stand there desperately pushing enemies away as they crawl closer, seeing how long you can last standing there before having to take the risk of changing position. I think level design can be more cramped here than Resident Evil 4, which I like. It sometimes feels really like the enemies are getting right into your face, and at the start it feels like you always barely managed to kill enemies before they were going to attack. There's this new evade move here where if you press forward and A on an Xbox controller at the correct time, you can dodge past enemies. I really like this. The timing is so specific that it's not really like a reliable dodge like in Bayonetta or something. It's just this last minute panicked way of getting past enemies, and it makes movement feel just a little less restrictive. The combat's great fun. It's mostly the same tense claustrophobic action of Resident Evil 4, However, that kind of also hurts it because it's not completely the same. In my last video I mentioned how Mario is really good because of how free he feels and how you can very naturally master his movement, and that is kind of similar with Resident Evil 4. You can just shoot enemies normally if you want to, or you could stun them with an accurate shot, which means you can kick or suplex them, and then if it's safe you knife them while they're down to save ammo. Also, while the suplex does more damage, the kick is wider, so if you're fighting a group you can take down multiple at once. And then there's the weapons differences, like how the shotgun has a wide spread and can take down a few enemies at once. And this is just with the basic enemies. There's more complicated ones later, but already there's so much you can do to just be better at the game, and it makes it so much fun to just like fuck about with. And Revelations just doesn't really give you this. You're much more limited in how you can fight enemies. You have sub-weapons, but they're fairly situational, and apart from that you can just shoot them in the head. The weapons don't feel too different mechanically, and you can't really stun enemies, mostly. It's not like it's because it's on the 3DS either. The Mercenaries uses a combat system very similar to Resident Evil 4's just fine. This is more because of the game's upgrade system. Around the ship you'll find these custom parts, and then when you get to a weapon locker you can choose where you want to apply these custom parts. You get a limited amount you can apply to each weapon, and you can remove them and move them to a different weapon, and certain weapons have more slots than others. It's a pretty simple system, and at the start it's alright. It's the one reason to explore the boat, and it's just simple upgrades like, better damage and, stuff you'd expect. However, you know how I said you mostly couldn't stun enemies? That's because it's tied to these upgrades. At the start of the game, I would barely be able to stun enemies. It would very rarely happen at complete random times, and I wondered why that was. Then I got an upgrade that raised the chance to stun enemies, and then the enemies would stun much more often, but still at complete random. So a lot of those fun moves are here, but instead of being tied to your accuracy or anything, it's just luck. It makes everything feel a lot more static and less interesting, which is such a shame. There's this thing called raid mode in the game, which is basically its equivalent of Mercenaries, and it's pretty fleshed out. There's tons of different characters, customization, guns, levels. They clearly put a decent amount of effort into it, and I was gonna talk about it, but for me, all it does is show how nerfed this combat system is. It doesn't feel like you're going for high scores like Mercenaries, it feels more like you're grinding to get better weapons, and it's alright, but again, it just feels kind of static. But just because the shooting isn't great doesn't mean it's not at least used interestingly. And Revelations shooting is put into claustrophobic environments with enemies towering over you and endless swarms when your ammo is quickly draining. Ooh. Just like most Resident Evil games, it's paced really well and just grabs you. However, just like most Resident Evil games. I think the reason people don't talk about this as much is because it just doesn't feel like it's doing its own thing amazingly. It's a mashup of different eras of Resident Evil. It has cool monster designs, but the rest of the horror elements are completely suffocated under the relentless action, and that action is fun to go through, but kept from being great by weird RPG elements. It's not the best at anything, really. I think it probably isn't remembered best because it has aged terribly, not in the way of it being hard to play now, but the appeal it once had has just been taken away from it. Like at the time it was cool to have a slightly more horror focused Resident Evil, but now we have actually horror-focused Resident Evils being released. And it's really good for being a portable Resident Evil, like this is a full Resident Evil 4S game released on a handheld, and it works perfectly. But I didn't give this nearly the praise it deserves because it's useless now, with some of the best Resident Evils being on Switch. I like Resident Evil Revelations a lot, it's just impossible to recommend without saying there's better stuff out there. If you've played Resident Evil 4 and want more Resident Evil 4 but slightly different, then it's great and I totally recommend it, but apart from that, I'd say to play Resident Evil 4. This video was shorter than I thought it would be, but I think that's just because it's harder to talk about this game individually. It's alright, it's one of those weird games where I remember having a lot of fun with it, but I can feel myself forgetting about it already. I get that with some games like Gears of War and stuff, but never with a Resident Evil game, which is a bit of a shame, but just whatever, it's still good. Anyway, I might play the sequel. I say that in every video now, that does not mean anything, but I might play it, I don't know. I don't own it, it's really weird to buy. On Steam they always put the first episode of it on sale for like 60p, but the full thing is always weirdly expensive. Like, right now, as I wrote this, I don't know if it still applies, but right now it seems to be on sale for £12, but the rest are like £5? So it's weird, but anyway. I don't really have any ideas for videos anymore, so I don't know what I'm gonna make. Hold on. Charlotte's Web on PS2. It's fun on the farm. When Wilbur the pig is sold to the Zuckerman farm, he looks forward to...
I don't think I'll ever live to see a prophet. I don't want to be a locket clinging to a chest till the last breath.